Are you looking for the perfect lenses for street photography? Today I'm sharing about 5 ZEISS lenses every street photographer should have, so stay tuned. One thing that holds true is that there is not a shortage of lenses in the world. There is an abundance of lenses, and sometimes choosing the right lens for certain applications is a very difficult task. In this particular video, I'm going to focus on just the ZEISS lenses and choose my 5 favorite lenses that I think are very great street photography lenses. So the first ZEISS lens that every street photographer should consider is the Bodice 1.8 85mm lens. This was the first ZEISS Bodice lens that I ever purchased for the Sony E-mount. It's an incredible lens for its focusing speed, color reproduction, and sharpness. Now, I get a lot of heat online for people who see this lens as just a portrait lens, but one of the best uses of this lens is street photography. Now, being that I'm a very shy photographer, I like having that distance between my subject and where I'm standing. So it kind of builds up a photographer's confidence, especially for those that are just starting out in photography. And for me, it's just a comfortable lens to photograph with. And I absolutely love this lens. It's great in low light situations, being that it's an f1.8 lens. It's very useful for when I'm photographing underground in the subway of New York City. And this lens is also weather sealed, allowing me to photograph when I'm outside in the rain or snow, which is something that I do quite often. An added advantage to this lens is that it also has optical steady shot. So if you're someone that's photographing with a camera like the A6000 or A7 that doesn't have in-body stabilization, this is a very great lens to have, where you're able to capture images where you avoid having that camera shake if your shutter speed is a little bit too slow if you're in low light situations. The next ZEISS lens that every street photographer should consider is the Bodice f2 25mm lens. Now, this is a lens that I never thought I would ever use because it's a wide angle prime, and because I used to be a wide angle photographer for most of what I shot, I opted for the 16 to 35mm lens. But I saw this lens on sale. I couldn't pass up a good sale, so I actually bought this lens, and my goodness, I have fallen in love with this lens for the past year, to where it stays on my camera most of the time. This is a super light lens. It's very compact lens. You know, you're not going to be weighed down by taking this lens out and photographing with it. And it's still an f2 aperture, which is perfectly enough for a lens of this range. Now, just like the 85mm lens, there are some people that might find this lens not being suited for street photography compared to like the 35 and 50mm lens ranges, but this is a beautiful lens to use for street. You know, I don't like classifying lenses into certain categories, and I like to use whatever I have and see if it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't, but the 25 works. Great lens to use. You know, just look at some of the images that I've captured with this. You can see that I've sometimes focused on the reflections. I'm focusing on the architecture with the people kind of being like accessories in my images. So my approach to using this lens as opposed to the 85 is very different, but it makes me a little bit more creative because it's a lens that I just generally didn't think I would ever use, but I do, and it allows me to kind of capture things that are a little bit out of my sort of comfort zone, and I can still get some really good, close-up street images with this lens as well. But if you're going to photograph with this lens, of course you have to be comfortable with yourself as a street photographer to use such a wide focal length like this and still capture up close images of people. The next ZEISS lens that every street photographer should consider is the Sonar 1.8 55mm ZA lens. This was the very first ZEISS lens that I ever purchased for the Sony E-mount when I transitioned from Sony A-mount to the E-mount in 2015. And to this day, this is still one of the best lenses you could ever own for the Sony E-mount camera system. It just has that it's just very unique in what the images that it produces are. Like, I really can't describe it, but hopefully just looking at some of the pictures, you kind of see a little bit of what I like and some of the characteristics of this particular lens. Now, one thing that I will say that is something to watch when you're using this lens is that it's not the best lens on focusing. It sometimes has where it might misfocus a bit. You actually have to be a little bit more cognizant when you're using this lens on what your focus point is. So I tend to use flexible spot and use the small flexible spot with this lens, because sometimes it will be a hit or miss. It's not to say that it's a terrible lens when it comes to focusing. It's just a little bit trickier. Just something to note, that's it. Just something to note, but it is still one of the best lenses. I refuse to get rid of this lens. It's the only prime Sony ZEISS lens that I have, and I just refuse to let this go because that's how good this lens is. The next lens is the Bodice f2 40mm close focus lens. This is a new lens that ZEISS produced within the last year, and it's a perfect fit right in between their 25 and 85mm lenses. Now, I actually have been using this lens quite a bit lately. This is a great compromise if you're someone that just wants to have one prime lens, but you don't want to have a 35 and you don't want to have a 50mm lens. This is a great in-between focal length for those two ranges. Now, another plus to that is that this has close focusing capability. Now, no, it's not a macro lens. It just has a close focusing capability to it, because you don't get the same magnification that you get with a dedicated macro of like a 1:2 or 1:1 magnification. But it's a good choice for those times where you do want to get some up close images, where this lens can focus at 24 centimeters. Great lens to have. If you just want one lens, not a 35 or a 50, the 40mm is your best bet to go with. Finally, we have the Loxia f2 50mm lens. Now, unlike the Sony ZEISS and ZEISS Bodice lenses, the Loxia family of lenses is completely manual. Now, I'm sure there are many that are watching this wondering, why would you have a manual lens when you have all of these other autofocusing lenses in this video? But for street photography, I feel using a manual lens gives you that total connection to the images that you're capturing. Now, when I photograph images with this lens, I don't mind if I'm maybe a little bit soft on focus. I'm more focused on the story that I'm trying to tell through the images that I capture. It's more so about capturing that moment versus capturing the most perfectly sharp image that I can. It's still easy to get in focus images by utilizing the focus peaking system of the camera. So even though this might be a manual lens, don't let that scare you too much, because this is still one of the best lenses that I feel anyone that's doing street photography will love and enjoy. Hopefully this video gave you some ideas as far as some new lenses for you to try. What lenses do you presently use for your street photography? Share with me below, and I'd love to see why you shoot with the lenses that you have. Be sure to follow me online on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Professor Hines. And be sure to check out my website at professorhines.com for my upcoming events, workshops, and my online store for Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom presets. Until next time, I'll see you all in the next video.